Hello everyone, I'm Jason DeLeon. Today we're going to go through an EBOO procedure. There's many different EBOO machines out there. The one that we're going to be working on today is from O3UV. I'm going to go through all the steps that you're going to need to complete this procedure. I want to remind you guys that the FDA has not evaluated ozone or UBI to show that it would improve or to treat any condition. So use this at your discretion. So there's going to be 4 phases or 4 steps to this whole procedure. The first one is going to be you're going to take the disposable pack and set everything up on the IV pole for the EBOO machine. The second phase is the priming phase. The third is the procedure. And then the fourth phase of this is discontinuing the procedure. So all of these steps, all 4 of these phases, if you want to call it that, have little nuances to them. So we're going to get into that. The first phase is actually just taking your disposable set and attaching it to the machine. There's an order to it, so that's what we're going to get into now. So the first one we're going to start off with is part number 5501. So if you'll locate that in your setup pack, it is also the blue line. So when you're doing an EBOO procedure, you're drawing blood from the patient and returning it back. Blue is going to be your return line. So that's what we're going to start with first. So this is what your blue line looks like out of the pack, and I'm going to go ahead and put that into the machine now. So you'll orient yourself with this tubing. This end is going to go towards your patient. So this cuvette is what I like to set in the actual device first. And this particular EBOO machine does have ultraviolet light component to it. In my personal opinion, that's the very best way to do an EBOO treatment, is going to combine both of those therapies. So that's where you saw that glass cuvette. So next is the actual, just getting this laid out here on this tray. So this is going to your patient. All right, so let's get our filter onto the IV pole here. So this is a filter, it's a dialysis filter that's repurposed for EBOO. So it's a diffuser in the EBOO world. We're inverting it, so we're using it a little bit different than a traditional dialysis treatment would use it. So the blue to the sky, remember that, and this is just going to snap into your IV pole just like this here. You'll want to make sure that you have your the inlet and the outlet angled towards the actual pump here. So this is your peristaltic pump. If you have them at too harsh of an angle, you'll have like an L, which will actually create a pretty good bend in the tubing there. So we're going to need a 30 ml syringe that's going to be attached to the IV pole as well. This will attach to this top part of this IV pole. And I'll explain what the syringe's job is. So in a traditional IV tubing set, you have a drip chamber that you squeeze to draw saline in or fluid in, or flip it over to push fluid back out. Its purpose is to essentially just pressurize that whole tubing set. That's exactly what this is going to do, and you'll see it play out here in just a minute when we prime. So, but you will need a 30 ml syringe that'll attach itself there. The one thing that I recommend too is you never want to just leave these things hanging and move on to another piece of the tubing. So I've seen people oftentimes will just set it up and they look at it, they're like, well, I don't know where that goes, so we'll just leave that there. Next thing you know, you have a lot of stuff that you've left there. So close out this circuit, so to speak, before you move on to the next tubing. So this is going to return ozonated blood to the patient because it is the blue line, it is the return line. So here in a minute, we're going to be drawing blood from the patient, going into this diffuser where ozone's coming in contact with it, returning blood back to the patient via this blue line. Next is part number 3202. So it's the red line that looks just like this. There's a little part number on the corner there. So this is going to have 2 ends on it. This end is going to go back to the filter. Remember, this is drawing blood. This is your red line. So it's going to draw blood from the patient going back into the diffuser. It's going to attach itself to the bottom of this diffuser here. So the next part number is part number 5503. I like to call this guy the $30,000 clamp. The reasoning for that is this is one of the blue lines that you're going to need to clamp before you prime. This particular line, its job is to, you'll see it in a second, it attaches to the ozone generator portion of the EBOO machine and draws ozone into the top of this filter. So we're going to get this attached to the circuit now. This is color coded, so this dark blue will go to this dark blue here. As you try and match this up in your mind, you'll see that play out. So it screws into the top there. You'll then clamp it. This end is threaded. So this is going to go to the ozone generator portion of this EBOO machine. So right now we have two blue clamps that are clamped. Everything else is open as you're keeping track of this. So this is what you're going to use as far as the suction cup goes, or the waste container for an EBOO treatment. On the top of this cup, it says patient, vacuum, and ortho. So there's a cap on this that you'll see that comes off relatively easily. This needs to be on the main part of this here, but all three of these little sub caps need to be off. We're going to be using the ortho side and the patient side of this particular lid, but not the vacuum. The vacuum will stay open. Next is part number 5504. It's got a red end on one side and then a light blue end. Anytime you see a light blue end, that's going to tell you that it's going to the suction cup on this particular circuit. All right, so part number 5504, we're going to attach this to the bottom of this filter. So there's tabs, wing little tabs there. This is going, remember this saying red to patient, so red to that patient setup there, or excuse me, patient connection on the cup. We're going to clamp this. So I'll explain more when I'm priming what you need to clamp, but that is one of them. So what we have left is part number 5505 and 5506. They look identical, but for this procedure, we're not going to use part number 5506. You can discard this particular one. So we're just going to use part number 5505. The reason we're discarding part number 5506 is because that's used for a procedure called EBOO 2. We're not training on that one. That's not one that we've actually done, or I've done in a long time in clinics that I've worked in. So we're just focusing specifically on EBOO, and we'll be using part number 5505. So this has another light blue end, which, as you may remember, goes to the suction cup, and then we have a threaded end that is going to go to an ozone destruct. So remember the saying, it says ortho to ozone destruct. This is your ozone destruct, little stainless steel looking cylinder here. Its job is to capture excess ozone and convert it into oxygen. So that's what it's going to be doing. You're going to attach that into that destruct there. So this is your setup now complete. All the disposable pack is now on the IV pole. Before we move into phase 2, which is the priming phase, we need to make sure that we have everything clamped that needs to be clamped, and things that need to be opened are opened as well. So this is your syringe that needs to be clamped. The reason for the why behind this is going to be clamped is that if this is open, number one, it will never pressurize. So you'll never be able to actually raise the level in this drip chamber. The why behind this clamp going from the ozone generator to the diffuser is we do not ever want to get saline back into the machine because we would ruin it. On this bottom red to patient line, the reason why that is clamped is because we do not want to prime the cup. We want to prime this diffuser with heparinized saline. Before we prime, let me go through the actual functions of the machine and buttons and so forth. So this 14.0 that you see on the display screen there, that is 14 revolutions per minute of this actual pump. So when I press play, that's what makes this run. You see this pump that's open, but it's called a peristaltic pump. So just like peristalsis in your intestines, it's moving the blood from the patient in waves. So every time this screw turns, it's moving 2.86 mLs of blood. It's actually going to be 40 mLs per minute. That's the draw rate. Over the course of a 50-minute treatment, we would effectively have 2 liters of treated blood that we're doing. So this is your play and pause button. It's paused, you can tell, because there's a blinking blue light. That's how you know that this is not running. So whenever this is in function, we would actually have this pump closed, and you would not be able to see inside of it. So that's, and I'll show you that here in a second. So 14.0, that's what you want it on. This will change your pump speed. You can change it up higher or lower. So that's how you adjust that. This will actually change the direction of the flow. It should always be on CCW, which is counterclockwise. I have not seen a reason yet in clinic why you would ever reverse flow. But if you needed to, you could with that particular button there. You would just change it over to clockwise. But again, that's your play and pause button. That's the main button there. This is your priming, your fast forward button for priming. So anytime you see these 3 dashes here, that means that it's now in effectively fast forward mode. You can see this turning much faster. When we take that off, it slows down. That speeds it up, slows down. So anytime you see those 3 lines, that's the actual fast forward mode there. This is your LED button here, your UV button. So that incorporates the biophotonic energy that's going to go into the blood as it's passing through the cuvette. Here's your ozone button. You know that that's running because of the blue light. This is a flow meter that's designed to be a redundancy check, so you make sure that you have oxygen whenever you're running the procedure. So when you are actually running the procedure, you'll see this ball sit inside there about 1 liter per minute. In order to prime this circuit and to do a procedure, a full 50-minute procedure, you would need a 500 ml bag of saline, 7,500 units of heparin. So that's what we're going to get ready to at this point. This 500 ml bag with heparinized saline will do both the priming part of this, getting everything the way that it needs to be, and then also the procedure part as well. So on this particular vial of heparin, it's 1,000 units per ml. So I just want to caution you, and I know this is a little elementary, to make sure that you know that I'm saying 7,500 units of heparin, not 7.5 mLs, because that's what it is on this one, but it may not be on your particular vial that you're using in your clinic. This is something else that I recommend, is getting actual tape, marking it down the heparin amount, your initials, on the bag. Again, I know this is extremely elementary, but this is a part where you could hurt someone, essentially, is adding too much heparin. All right, so now just a traditional IV admin tubing set. So I don't need to prime this tubing completely out because we're going to do that on the EBOO tubing itself here in a second. Before we prime, we need to make sure that things are open that need to be opened, meaning our blue line and our red line. The clamps are open at the moment, so that we need everything to flow out of the blue line. That's completely opened. We're going to double check to make sure that our 3 lines are clamped on the actual pole, so the 2 blues and 1 red. So this is going to the syringe. This is going to be clamped. The actual, the red to patient line, that is clamped. And then your $30,000 clamp is clamped as well. So those are good to go. Now we're going to go to our red line here. So as you notice, there's a heparin Y port closest to this patient access. So we're gonna actually insert our heparinized saline mix line into this first port here. So we are going to clamp off, going back to the pump. So you'll notice this. So this, everything going back this way is clamped off. So it's going to flow out on this end. So I'm going to roll this completely wide open. If you do this right, you should not spill a whole lot of saline, or if any at all. So the second I see any saline get to the end, I'm going to clamp. If you see any bubbles at all, remember that this is going away from the patient. So this is never going to come in contact with them. So at the moment, we have 2 red lines that are clamped, so nothing is flowing. So I'm now going to open this up, and I'm going to run it back to the filter itself. So once this gets to, it runs into the diffuser, the filter, I'm going to then place it into the pump. So I'm holding it down to get all those air bubbles out, and then I'll place it into the actual peristaltic pump. Okay. So there are 2 tabs on the side of this peristaltic pump that you're going to need to hold open. I'd also want to point out that you're going to use the fat part of the tubing to get this into the pump. So I'll hold this tab up, slide that in, hold this other side up, and slide this in. Roll this close. I like to have it fairly taut, as you can see, just like that. So now we're able to prime with the machine. This is the fastest way to do it. So I'd recommend pressing play first. So The reason why you press play is if you'll know if your tubing's in order or not. If you hear this little rocking motion, that means that the tubing has not been set into the pump actually correct. So you're gonna need to open this up and just adjust it. It's either rolled too far forward or too far back. Now I'm gonna press play again, okay? Running, so then press fast forward, the fast forward prime button, and now it's actually flowing really good. So what you're gonna wanna stare at, and I do wanna note that when you're doing this, you're gonna be standing in front of the machine. You're gonna be staring at this heparinized saline line that's rising up into this diffuser. So as you're watching this, you're gonna wait until it gets to this drip chamber. Once it hits the drip chamber, you're gonna count to 3. It's a quick 3 count. And we're gonna unclamp this syringe, draw air into the line, which raises this level. This is essentially squeezing this drip chamber, right? But this is what you're paying attention to right now. It's currently at this line right here and rising. If you screw this up, you're gonna waste a lot of heparinized saline, so it's extremely important that you pay attention to this side. All right. So 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna draw air into the syringe, lock that line, grab my blue line. As soon as that comes out, I'm gonna press pause on the machine, make sure there's no bubbles. There's not, pause, clamp. This is now primed. Now I want to take my fast forward off. It's now at 14.0. I want to close my heparin line. That's extremely important. The reason for that is here in a minute when we get patient access. If I leave this open, unclamp those lines, this whole heparinized mixture is going back to the patient. So it's extremely important this is closed. So my blue line is clamped, nothing is coming out of it. My red line, heparin line is closed. We're ready to move into the third phase, which is actually the procedure. So now we're gonna move into getting access to the patient. Before I get access to this patient, I need to really stress how important having a qualified IV start person in your clinic is for this particular procedure. This is not a Myers cocktail where you set it and you think you got good access, you don't, you have like a drip that's not consistent. You guys know what I'm talking about. You need home run, like great access into these veins. So we're using 20 gauge catheters. I wouldn't recommend going any lower than that. You can use 18s, but I don't see that even changing the flow any. So I'd recommend 20s. It's a great place to start, but cannot stress enough. And I've seen this play out, unfortunately, in negative ways where I go into a clinic and they just don't have people that can hit good veins or hit veins at all. So please remember, this EBOO treatment is not for you if you do not have the appropriate staff in your clinic to be able to effectively start IVs on every patient that walks through the door. And one more note, you can use a port or a PIC. You can use it as a return line, so you're still gonna need peripheral access. Peripheral access meaning any vein. So you can get creative if you want to. I've seen an arm and a foot, that's fine. As good as your skill set is in hitting veins, that's what you can use for this particular procedure. You can even use unilateral access, which I've actually had done on me personally. There's a lot of pressure in my arm. We had to alternate the tourniquet, but as long as you're not connecting to the same tree branch, so to speak, of that vein, you can use unilateral access. So one thing I would recommend as you're looking at this patient is we're gonna start this line that's closest to the patient and then move to the outer one. The reason is you don't want a line draped across you as you're starting an IV or anything like that. So that's one of my recommendations is start the arm closest to the machine and then work away. One question we get a lot is how do I know which one is my draw line? How do I know which one is my return line? If it fills up the hub, great. You guys have seen those when you're starting IVs. That's gonna be your draw line. So whichever arm that is, it does not have to be a left arm or right arm. Whichever fills up the hub the best, that's your draw line. So we have access to our patient here. A couple things I do wanna point out is I'm actually using Tegaderm. Got access, taped down the actual catheter, put Tegaderm on top of it, and then taped it down again. That's a little secure, a little overkill, but the reasoning for it is that we're running blood through this tubing. It can get hot and it'll actually cause some of that tape to unstick. So you wanna make sure you anchor it down really well. The tubing does get heavy as well with the blood in it. So what we're gonna do now is open our blue line to just keep patency of the vein, open the red line as well. Our heparin line is closed, so that's why we can do that safely. We're not having anything going back to him. One thing that's unique for this EBOO procedure is we're going to keep the tourniquet on the draw line. So this is a seatbelt style tourniquet. They're actually fairly comfortable. We're going to put that back on his arm. All right, so we're going to get ready to get started. We have our two blue lines that are open, two blue clamps, excuse me, that are open. These two here. Our two red clamps are open. And what I'm going to do now is move this heparinized saline line over to this Y port here that's closer to the pump. Here in a minute, you're going to see a pulsing action, which is extremely important. So I want to get that away from gravity. So it'll play out here in a minute. I'm just moving that for the moment. So we're going to press play and verifying that we're drawing blood where we need to draw blood, returning the heparinized saline where we need to return. And at this point, all we're doing is just moving blood. We're running it into the filter. There's no therapeutic benefit that's taking place. There's a process that's going to happen here in a minute when this is 3/4 of the way full of blood, where we'll turn on our ozone and UV light and actually start the procedure then. So once you get blood that moves past this heparinized saline port, we're then going to roll this mixture on. This is a very popular question, is how do you know the drip rate? Well, my answer is this pulsing in the Y port will tell you. I'm going to try and get that to set up so where you can see. You guys should be able to see a little bit of bouncing going up in there. That is the pulse that I'm talking about. When you see that, you've set your drip rate correctly. This is a very slow drip rate that's going on here, but that pulsing is showing me that we have it correct. So too fast of a drip rate means no pulse at all, as you can see. Too slow, and blood will actually start running into the line. So we want it at a nice little pulsing action there, and that's how we know we have it set correct. What I do often is I will tape this up, get it to sit. So, and it will take a little bit of work there with your tape to get that set right, but that's the best way to do it. So now what we're waiting on is this filter to fill up 3/4 of the way full of blood before we turn on our ozone and UV light. One of the good visual indicators for you to know when this is taking place is there's like a champagne blush color that takes effect here in the drip chamber. So when this turns that rosé champagne looking color, then it's time to actually start your ozone and your UV lights and start the actual procedure. Then you will start getting a therapeutic benefit to your patient. So what we're doing now is just continuing to watch this drip chamber, waiting for it to turn into, like I said, this rosé champagne looking color here. So we're almost there. We're probably about 30 seconds out before it's time to actually start the ozone and UV light. So we're about that time. You guys can see, looks like strawberry lemonade. I can give you all the drink visuals if you'd like, but you see the color difference there. That's your cue that it's time to start the process of turning on your oxygen and UV light. Here's my recommendation. Start from the bottom of the filter and work all the way back around to the machine. The reasoning behind that is if you turn your oxygen on too early, it's going to blow off this oxygen tubing, and it's real close to your patient. It's a little loud, it'll startle them. So here's the process that you go. You unclamp this red to patient line, that's open. Unclamp this ozone line going to the filter. We're going to then slide this clamp down and work this kink out. This clamp is oftentimes an overachiever and we'll leave a kink there. So now that this process is open, we can come down here. We're going to press our LED button, our UV button, our ozone button, turn on the oxygen tank. It's going to be at 1 liter per minute. We can verify that we have oxygen on there, and then we will start the timer. So this will then set to 50 minutes. Now here's the 3 things we're going to manage during this procedure. If you follow these 3 things, you will catch problems before they ever happen. It's just, this is what you're going to actively monitor. So we're going to watch the draw line to make sure that there's no bubbles, meaning we don't have a positional catheter, it's not up against a vein wall, something to that effect. We're going to watch there. We're then going to take a look at this pulsing action. Is it pulsing correctly? Remember, blood going into the IV tubing line means it's not flowing fast enough. The drip rate is not flowing fast enough. The drip rate of heparinized saline. Is there pulsing? Is there no pulsing at all? No pulsing means that you have this drip rate running way too fast. So right now you can kind of see that nice rocking motion. That's perfect. So this is 1, 2, and then 3 is our actual drip chamber here. So if we're having issues with the draw side of this circuit, the level of our blood will start to decrease. So that means that we have a draw line issue. If we have an issue with the return line, this level here will start to rise and rise and rise because you're not able to return blood correctly. This will play out in the drip chamber. The drip chamber is like the dashboard on your car. It tells you everything. When you guys get good at this, you'll be able to glance at this from across the room and know what is going on with your machine and what's going on with your patient. So if you have poor draw access, you're gonna see this blood it's gonna look like it's rocking, like it's like trying to struggle to drop blood into this drip chamber. This particular circuit here is perfect at the moment, completely happy. No rocking at all, nice and solid. The drip, one question that I get a lot is, well, how high should the drip chamber be? My answer to you is it needs to sit wherever it's at. So wherever it rising is where it needs to stay at. Because remember, rising means we have a draw line issue. Rising means a return issue. Lowering of the blood in the drip chamber means we have a draw line issue. So I do want to point out too that if you get good access, you really stack the odds in your favor of having a circuit just like this. This is just perfect and happy. The opposite is true as well. Having poor access or having an iffy start will result in a lot of headache and a lot of problems for you. So if we were having issues on this particular patient here where it's just not drawing correctly, he's got enough veins, enough good peripheral vein access where we would just restick and just start. So we would pause the machine, get a new access, remove that line, attach it to the new draw site, and start right there. There's no reason to keep messing with it. If you do happen to have a positional catheter, then it's traditional IV methods there. So you're gonna put traction on it, you're gonna put Coban and just pressure, that's really it. If you feel the buzzing, that's typically you're on a valve, right? So all those things, just traditional IV management anyway. So I want to touch on a couple of hot topics in the EBOO world. One is that there's a filtration effect to this. A true filter means it's going to screen something from flowing past, or block, let's say like a coffee filter, for instance, right? Or like an engine oil filter. It's catching debris that's keeping your engine from getting metal fragments and ruining the motor. So that's its job. It traps something that's a smaller micron size than the filter and keeps it from passing. With this particular filter, and remember, in the EBOO world, there's only 2 types of filters. There's one that's pre-filled with dialysate, so it's a wet filter, or a dry filter. That's what this is. We've actually inverted it for EBOO, so we're transferring ozone into all of these little, they look like straws, thousands and thousands of little vertical straws in here. They look like white little striations on this. Inside of every one of those straws are a 0.2 micron size of ozone that's being dispersed into the blood. So there's not a true filtration that's going through this. Will it collect some gunk here and there? Absolutely. The problem is you cannot consistently make this filter collect whatever gunk you're trying to collect. So let's say you have a Lyme disease patient. There's some other training entities that say that the body will voluntarily give up certain things. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I want to make sure that you guys are aware that in order for this to be a true filter, that it needs to be used for dialysis and run at 400 mLs per minute, which, because they're using arterial fistula, it's really pumping that blood, or the volume through. This is running at 40 mLs per minute, so you don't have a true filtration. Will it collect some? Yes. There's a good quote that I've heard that if you have patio furniture out on your dock and it collects dust, does that make it a dust filter? No, but it's going to collect some gunk on it. That's the same thing that's going on here. From this, the other part of this circuit is the cup. So there's going to be some waste products that play into this cup. They present themselves that look like foam with some, I'd say, liquid as well. Typically, the liquid looks like plasma colored. I've seen it yellowish to some degree, but that's it. One key huge takeaway is if you ever see red in the cup, that means you possibly have hemolysis going on and you need to stop that therapy right then. That's not a good thing. There's a way to mismanage this circuit to where you get red in the cup, but that is more of a you problem versus a patient problem. So meaning if this drip chamber were to get too high, it's going to create back pressure, which ultimately could lead to red in the cup. If that's the case, again, you guys will make this call. You probably don't need to draw like a CMP or CBC, but if this particular patient here, the drip chamber is perfect, and all of a sudden he starts getting red in his cup, that would be a good sign of hemolysis, and you would need to draw those labs and test and see what's going on. At any given moment outside the body, though, we have 300 mLs of blood. So while this looks like a lot of blood, I want to frame this in something that patients are very common with is a blood donation. Typically, when you donate blood, it's 1 pint of blood, which is close to 470-ish mLs. So let's say 500 mLs to round up. So that's nowhere near a blood donation. So when you have a nervous Nelly of a patient, I would just remind them that even though this looks like fire hoses of blood that's being pulled out of them, it's only 300 mLs at any given moment, and it's constantly rotating, so you don't have any hemodynamic changes in the body. So that is a good thing to remember as far as the safety of EBOO. Let's walk through a couple scenarios, even though they're not presenting here with this patient. But let's say we do have so much foam building up in this cup. What would you do? You would slowly, a couple things you could do is slowly remove this cap. Remember, this is going to be under a little bit of pressure at that time. Place a trash can under there, and foam will fall out into that trash can. That's what I commonly see that's done out in clinics at the moment. The other one would be to pause it, take this lid off, dump it, come back and press play and get rolling back again. I prefer personally just taking the cap off and letting that foam fall into a trash can. If you do not catch this in time, this cap here could eventually pop off and, spray a little bit of foam. It's not dramatic, but it would be enough to make a noise hearing that pop. As far as patient reactions in the chair, the most common one when you very first start would be a vasovagal reaction. So they have worked themselves up so much from seeing all of this. That's why my recommendation would be that you prime everything before the patient ever even sits down in the chair. So Miss Jones walks in, she sits in the lobby, you're setting all this up. She comes and sits down, we start, done. That way there's less time for her to work herself up. Another thing is if you, and this is something I've seen out in several clinics, if you miss veins over and over again, that cortisol in the patient is going to continue to rise and rise and rise. They potentially could have the second part of this adverse reaction, which is hypoglycemia. So eating a huge meal before let's say a big protein-rich meal before the procedure is huge. I would also recommend testing your patient's blood sugar before. So they would need to be at 110 and above, like our patient here, before even starting the procedure. So to give you an example, I recently did an EBOO, ate a big meal, sat down and did a finger stick, and I was at 107, even though I'd eaten. So that gives you a good idea. Even though I say I've eaten, I'm still, and the reason for the method of action behind it is that ozone and UBI can cause glycolysis, which would lower that patient's blood sugar. You see it play out in a few symptoms where they tell you, hey, my stomach doesn't feel right. Or you see them sweating, you see them a little agitated, you see them constantly fidgeting. That's the early signs of hypoglycemia. You want to jump on that early. You can hang a bag of D5 that's going to run right into this return line right here to circumvent that, to knock that out. So like a 250 ml bag of D5 I've seen used, 100 ml bag, something like that to help bump them up, and they're usually good. I would recommend not removing access, that's for sure. If you don't have D5, give them some juice, some apple juice, orange juice, something like that to really spike their blood sugar in the short term. So I want to talk about air in the line. So let's say we get bubbles from, it would start here on the return line. Those bubbles are going to go through the peristaltic pump. Oftentimes bubbles can sit up there at the top. They usually, a lot of times they won't even come out. From there, they will go into the diffuser. Bubbles often there will go and die, but you're gonna pay for it here at the drip chamber. That's where you're gonna see your level drop from those bubbles. So too many bubbles, ultimately you end up lowering the drip chamber to a level that's not safe, meaning it's gonna fall behind this line here, and you're gonna create bubbles that go back to the patient. As I mentioned earlier, there is a Y port on this return line that you could use to put like a 60 ml syringe and draw bubbles off. It's extremely rare to have that happen though. Where I have seen bubbles make it all the way around is that when you attach the tubing to the catheter, there's a pretty big hub to this tubing. So you need to make sure that you really stick it into the hub and tighten it down. If you don't, I've seen what looks like carbonated blood. They're like these micro bubbles that will run all through the draw line, back into your drip chamber, and they will just make themselves all the way through back to the patient. Those create a huge mess. That's why it's extremely critical to monitor those three points: the draw line access, the pulsing here, your drip chamber. If you're looking at all three of those, you're gonna catch that pretty quick and it will not become an issue. All right, I wanna point out that we are about at the halfway point of this procedure. From a symptomatic observation, what I've seen on patients is that they typically have a few things. You may see some flushing on their skin. Remember that you're getting a big NO release, nitric oxide release from UV and the ozone itself, so that can present itself in that patient, so that's where that flushing comes from. The other thing is patients can say, hey, I feel a little fuzzy-headed. You know, they are picking up a huge vasodilation or oxygen uptake from this procedure, so that's what oftentimes what that is. So I want to make you guys aware of that. The other part is they are sitting like this for a little over an hour, so they need to be comfortable in whatever chair that they pick. So if they move, they sneeze, they got to scratch something, you need to check the drip chamber, make sure that a catheter is not kinked or anything like that. And once it is, then you're good. Just monitor your 3 points that I recommended. The next thing I want to point out is this cup. So this particular patient has hardly any waste products in the cup. Let me give you just from my experience. So I've done close to 600 of these procedures that I've personally witnessed. I've done 10 on myself. Out of those 10, I've had 5 that had foam that almost overflowed out of the cup, and 5 at the end of the procedure looked almost like that. So what I want to point out is I would be cautious to get into this, I don't know how you want to put it, get into like this ideology that the cup equals something. So this particular, let's say we were in the mindset of nothing in here means this patient is eating perfect and doing everything they need to do. Well, what I've seen play out is this patient comes back for a treatment in 10 days or so, and now their cup is starting to foam out. So for me, like, please remember, 10 treatments, they're all over the place. Lots of foam, no foam. So a lot of foam, no foam doesn't really mean anything, even though it's extremely visual. Your patients are gonna notice it right off the bat. All of the magic, so to speak, is going on in this filter. We're having ozone combined with blood on a much greater diffusion scale than traditional major autohemotherapy. So that is where the magic is happening. Blood is going past UV light and then returning back to the patient. The other component to this is we're using such a low gamma. So this is 3 gamma that's going into the blood, which creates a lot more of the latent, long-lasting effects of ozone. So that again is where the secret sauce, so to speak, or the magic is happening for this procedure. It's not necessarily the cup. So that is one thing I'd caution you guys against, and you'll see this play out in your own personal EBOO treatments. Like for mine, 10 treatments, 5 lots of foam, 5 no foam. I personally have not done anything different from like an exercise habit or eating habit. It's just how it's worked out. So, all right, guys, we're at almost the end of this procedure. We have 30 seconds left. When the timer goes off, we don't just pull access from the patient and tell him to hit the road. There's still 300 mLs of treated blood that needs to go back to him. So there's a whole process that we're gonna do where we're gonna get the blood that's left over back to him. We're gonna turn the timer off. There's a button on here that says SPST. That is now cleared. So I'm gonna pause the machine. Remember, you know it's paused because it's blinking. Gonna clamp the blue line, clamp proximal to patient access, clamp this red line, So we're gonna remove the red line. That's what we're gonna do now. So let me take this tourniquet off of you. I bet that feels good. So I'm gonna remove the red line, and then we're going to trick the machine by drawing air into the circuit. The air is never gonna make it to the patient to run that remaining amount of blood back to his left arm. So now I'm gonna unclamp his blue line because we need to return this blood back to him. I'm going to place this red line, point it at the trash, press play first, unclamp, and then I can hold this straight up, and you can see the actual line of air forcing that blood back to him. Once this blood goes past the pump, then we can then place this into our trash, set it down, and then get ready to watch this blood run back to the patient. Eventually this will make its way through into the drip chamber. You'll see this line play out, and then we'll just watch it and follow it all the way back around. So now you can see there's the line there. It'll start decreasing in the actual drip chamber as it's running back to the patient. There will be a little bit of residual blood that gets trapped over in this, but it's honestly not that much. If this were to stall out, so you guys are aware, you could unclamp this syringe, push pressure, push air into this, and slowly nudge it through. Just remember that the patient is attached to the end of this, so you want to very slowly push that, and I can demo that now. So all I'm going to do is unclamp, slowly push a little bit of air, and it's going to just get this going a little quicker than it was. And you'll have a few that stall here and there, so this is something you will do in the real world, so to speak. Now that this, we no longer have blood being ozonated in there, I'm going to press the ozone button, turn that off. All right, guys, so we've made it on this other side here. So we do not want air going to our patient. So what we're going to do is once it gets to this clamp here, and then going to clamp it. So you're going to clamp first, then pause the machine. Close enough at this point, so we're going to clamp, pause, turn UV, LED, turn your oxygen off. Remember, it's going to stay at 1 liter per minute anyway. So the toggle on the actual regulator can stay at 1 liter per minute. We just turn the main valve off, turn the machine off, and then now I'm going to remove access from his draw line. All right, so now your patient can get up and they're free to go, do whatever they need. I have seen blood pressure, pre-post checks done, blood sugar, just verifying. There's a couple of examples of good EBOO documentation forms that I've seen where they have the patient sit, in the lobby for 15 minutes before they leave. Again, all your call, but most of the patients feel pretty good after the treatment. They'd be able to drive home and do whatever they need to do. All right, guys, so let me walk you through the steps on how to get this all off the pole in the easiest way possible. So we're gonna take this down. If you guys notice, we didn't really use a whole lot of heparinized saline for the procedure. Take this off. What I'm gonna do now is remove this off the pole, pull this out of the hood. One thing that's extremely important is you want to clamp this red line. So when I open this pump, you are going to see this move. If that red line is not clamped and your catheter is pointed in the wrong direction, it can squirt. Remember, there is tabs on the sides of that pump there. So next on this side, what I'm going to do is unscrew this tubing that goes to the ozone generator, remove this red to patient part. Then I'll take this off the IV pole and it all comes off nice and neat and easy. This cup here, well, this particular patient didn't have a whole lot of waste products. I've seen this thrown in the regular trash because it isn't blood products, flushed down the toilet, whatever you guys choose there, however you want to discard it. And then as far as actually wiping the machine down, as you can tell, nothing really comes in contact as far as patient waste. Nothing really comes in contact with the machine. other than there could be foam that overflows here on this ring, something along those lines. So a good maticide wipe, clean down would be great there. Outside of that, every time you get a new packet and a new set, the machine stays relatively clean. So in conclusion of the EBOO procedure, remember getting good IV access on a patient is so important. Monitoring those 3 points that I gave you, good policies in place to check blood sugar before the patient comes in and actually sits in the chair. All of those little tips and tricks are really extremely important to have a successful EBOO procedure. The next thing goes with saying the word procedure. So if I tell a patient, hey, tomorrow you're going to come in to get a procedure done at 8:30 versus you're going to have an IV done, patients, that word procedure has a lot more weight to it as well. So I'd keep that in mind. I'd use that verbiage. The last part is titration part of this, right? So we're running a 50-minute session. That gets the full 2 liters of blood that's treated. So the way that I would word that, or the recommendation would be, today we're going to do, Mr. Patient, we're going to do your treatment up to titration, which could be 50 minutes. I would say that versus doing a half therapy, meaning, because a lot of times to patients, half therapy means half price, half as much healing and so on. So use the verbiage of to titration.